If you like our show, you should check out Business Casual from Morning Brew. Business Casual dives into the unexpected business story behind everything. How do workers benefit from the Great Resignation? Will TikTok change the music industry forever? What's behind the wild real estate market? Journalist Nora Ali and comedian Scott Rogowski bring you conversations with creators, thinkers, and innovators who can tell you what it all means and why you should care. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Before the deal with Musk was made, a lot of us were speculating that Twitter's earnings wouldn't be positive. And even if those numbers beat analyst expectations for Q1, the fact that Twitter was inflating its user figures for the past 3 years was not likely to be music to most shareholders' ears.
Hey gang, it's Thursday, May 12th. Jasmine and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an e-marketer podcast made possible by M-Particle. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by one of our principal analysts covering social media. It's Jasmine Emberg.
Hey Marcus, hey everyone.
Okay, I can't do it. My heart's pounding. All right, we were talking about ghosts right before we hit record. So if I just start screaming for no apparent reason, that's what's happening. I don't have them here. I don't know anymore. Do I? Thanks,
I'm
Jasmine.
sorry for scaring you, Marcus.
Thanks, Victoria, who edits the show. You two are the worst. Anyway, today's fact. I might have ghosts. I don't have ghosts. Today's fact. 12 publishers rejected J.K. Rowling's original Harry Potter, Lunatics. Before all her success, author J.K. Rowling sent her synopsis to many different publishers and was rejected 12 times, according to our sister company, Business Insider. Based on 2016 estimates, the Harry Potter franchise was valued at $25 billion.
Wow.
What were they thinking? I still haven't read them though. Is that bad?
I was going to ask, are you a Harry Potter fan?
No, I read 5 minutes of the first one to my little sister when they first kind of came out. That's it.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's bad.
I'm
going to have to
fan.
quit the show, aren't I? I'm going to have to leave. You read did you read the books?
Read every single book. Haven't actually seen a single movie though, because I don't want it to spoil the books.
Yeah, I probably will. I've seen 4 of the movies.
But I'll tell you how big of a fan I actually am.
Okay.
I went to the place in Portugal where J.K. Rowling actually wrote the book.
Wow. What's there?
I mean, it's a cafe in a bookshop or a library. I mean, to be fair, It was full of other Harry Potter tourists, but
okay.
I still count that as being a pretty big fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea. That's where she wrote the first one, most of it, some of it?
Yeah, so the story goes that she wrote a lot of it on like napkins and notebooks and whatnot. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
man.
It's an incredible story.
I have so many questions. But we've got to talk about Twitter. Today's real topic, Twitter. So Jasmine, me, you, and our colleague Jeremy talked about why Elon bought Twitter, changes we expected to see, and what's next for advertisers on Monday's Behind the Numbers Daily show. Today, we are focusing mainly on how they did in Q1, how much money they made, how many users they added, things like that. So let's dive in. User highlights. Twitter's monetizable daily active users reached 229 million in Q1, up 12 million on last Q1. That's a lot better than the 7 million they added last Q1. Pretty much all of those new users came from rest of world. However, the US monetizable daily active users, which is what they count, MDAUs, did tick up. The US MDAUs did tick up about 2 million to get close to 40 million. Twitter's US users had been stuck at 38 million all of last year. They've gone down a fraction, but we're pretty much stuck at 38 million after plateauing. Jasmine, the most interesting user figure for you, though, this quarter was blank.
So we didn't have a lot to work with this quarter, but we did get those user miscount figures. So I'm going to go with those as being the most interesting. And that's because before the deal with Musk was made, a lot of us were speculating that Twitter's earnings wouldn't be positive. And even if those numbers beat analyst expectations for Q1, the fact that Twitter was inflating its user figures for the past 3 years was not likely to be music to most shareholders' ears.
Yeah, so the backstory here is during Q1 earnings, Twitter admitted to accidentally overcounting some MDAUs between Q1 2019 and Q4 2021. Sarah Fisher of Axios explains that Twitter says this happened because of a feature that let people link multiple separate accounts together to conveniently switch between them. If it counted those two separate accounts as two users for over 3 years. Jasmine, I'm surprised this wasn't a bigger story. What are we supposed to make of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, Twitter switched to reporting MDAUs or monetizable daily active users a couple of years ago, saying it was a better measure of usage on its platform than monthly active users. At that time, monthly active users were not doing so great. So that was probably one reason for the switch as well. And now we know that MDAUs weren't as good as we thought either. So, it's certainly not great news.
Yeah, Miss Fisher of Axios noting this isn't the first time Twitter has admitted to overcounting its user base. In 2017, they said they overstated its user base numbers for the previous 3 years. I don't know what to think anymore. Jasmine, we'll talk a bit more about users and engagement more specifically. A recent study found that nearly half of US adults on Twitter are more likely to lurk, quote unquote, lurk, rather than post their own content, writes Matt G. Southern of Search Engine Journal. Nearly half of all Twitter users tweet less than 5 times a month. Nearly half of all Twitter users tweet less than 5 times a month, according to Pew Research. Most of those folks are likely to be older millennials and Gen X. The 18 to 29-year-olds make up the majority of Twitter's most frequent tweeters. What are your thoughts on this research?
Well, it's not exactly news. I mean, there are a lot of passive users on social media, particularly on Twitter. But it is interesting because this is also something that Musk seems to be fixated on and wants to fix. If you remember, in April, he called out some of the top accounts on Twitter for rarely ever tweeting, including Justin Bieber, who apparently posted only once the entire year, and even asked if Twitter was dying because of that.
Yeah, Pew had something similar to this a number of years ago, and it was something along the lines of 10% of Twitter users account for 80% of the tweets. So if you have a room of 10 people, one of those people is responsible for 80% of the content on Twitter, which is a lot. They were tweeting, I think, 140 times a month. And the other people in the room, the other 9 out of 10 people, were tweeting twice a month. So there's always been a huge disparity. I find that stat fascinating. And this kind of furthers that point. Infrequent tweeters were 3 times as likely to say that discovering other points of view is the main reason for visiting the site, though. 3 times as likely as people who tweet all the time. Jasmine, Twitter Circles has also talked about being tested in a limited capacity. I think Instagram's close friends feature, users can invite up to 150 people to their Twitter circle. Any thoughts on this feature or Instagram's close friends feature? Is this just another feature that they've added and it's not really going to move the needle at all? Or do you kind of believe in this idea of moving more towards kind of local community-based usage?
I think there's a lot of value in community-based social usage. We've seen that it's, been an important shift within the social media landscape, and people want more privacy, more security, and really just to feel safe posting on the platform. And Twitter Circles is a step in that direction. Yeah.
Your biggest takeaway from user growth figures this quarter is blank.
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway actually isn't from the earnings itself, but from a May 6th article from New York Times, which was about Musk's pitch deck to investors about his plans for Twitter, which A, finally means we have some real insight into what he's thinking, but B, has some really lofty goals. And I think the one really interesting, there was a lot of really interesting things in that pitch deck, but one thing that was really interesting to me was that Mystery X business that he pointed out that he said would have 9 million users by the end of 2023. And that's something, we have no idea what this business could be. My first thought, it could be related to his tweet about charging governments and commercial users a small cost to use the service, or perhaps it's an ad-free version of Twitter. Who knows?
Yeah, on that one, he wants 100 million subscribers for a Mystery X service, project, initiative, whatever you want to call it, by 2028. It's about 5 or 6 years. He wants over 100 million subscribers for this thing. There are a number of things that jumped out to me here, Jasmine. One of them was he wants close to 1 billion users, over 900 million users of Twitter, regular Twitter, by 2028. Seems far away. Again, that's 5 or 6 years away. Talking about cutting Twitter's reliance on advertising by less than 50% of revenue and quintupling revenue to 26 billion again by 2028. Yeah, this just recently came out. So maybe we can put together another episode looking more specifically at what he plans to do, how much of it's realistic, what we make of that. But Jasmine, let's move back to their earnings. Your favorite part of the show, put a grade on their user earnings for Q1.
Oh, Marcus, you know how I feel about this.
It's too good. This is what you get for talking about ghosts.
Okay, fine. I'll give him a C.
Okay.
Maybe a D, a C.
Probably a C. Let's be
probably a C.
Yeah. Okay. C for their user figures. For Q1, let's move to the revenue. Twitter made over 1.1 billion in ad revenue in Q1, up 23% year on year. That's down from the 32% year on year growth they saw last Q1. US ad revenue, which accounts for just over half the money Twitter makes, was responsible for most of the growth, reaching 32%. That is faster than the 22% of last Q1 and faster than the 14% growth international advertising revenue saw in Q1. So US ad revenue was the star pupil of the quarter. But Jasmine, the most interesting revenue figure for you this quarter was blank.
The subscription and other revenue figure, which came in at $94 million.
Same.
Which I would also note was down year over year.
31%. Yeah. Very surprising.
A lot. But it's not exactly a new line item. Twitter did say back in Q4 that it was going to rename its data licensing and other revenue line item to this. And it includes revenue from Twitter Blue and a couple of other things. But the reason it's so interesting is going back to that pitch deck that we were talking about. Musk had subscription revenue alone coming in at $10 billion in 2028, which is 100 times more than where the subscription and other revenue figures stand today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No more details on Twitter Blue subscription and how that's doing. Your biggest takeaway from the revenue growth figures this quarter has to be blank.
Musk has his work cut out for him.
He certainly does.
He really does.
New York Times, they were noting that Twitter has not turned a full-year profit for 8 of the last 10 years. It's a lot. But there was one commentator, I forget who it was, from the episode on Monday, saying that he's made electric cars become pretty mainstream with Tesla. He obviously was foundational in getting PayPal off the ground. He's turned SpaceX into a $100 billion valued company. So yeah, why not? Why can't he turn Twitter around? In terms of revenue grades for Q1, what would you give them?
Breaks my heart, Marcus, but Twitter is getting a D.
A D, yeah.
A D.
Oh, savage. Jasmine, they did say that they scrapped their somewhat lofty, or I thought their goals were lofty before. They were trying to reach 315 million MDAUs and $7.5 billion in annual revenue by the end of 2023. But as you circulated this pitch deck with me, these goals seem even more astronomical than that. That's all we've got time for the lead. Time now for the halftime report. Jasmine, a takeaway from the first half and also an overall grade for Twitter's Q1.
So, I think the one thing I would end on is that this may be the last time we get an earnings report from Twitter, depending on when the deal goes through. And there wasn't even an earnings call this time. So it was a big change for covering Twitter. Yeah. Although I will say it's been more exciting than it has in a very long time to be talking about Twitter. Overall grade, I can't do pluses or minuses, can I?
Nope.
Don't allow that.
Stop trying.
Fine. Twitter gets a D.
Twitter. You better hope it's not your last quarterly earnings. I need better than that. Anyway, that's what we've got time for the lead. It's time now for In Other News. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, mParticle. At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to www.mparticle.com. Folks, we are back. Today in other news, can anyone challenge the status quo of social media? And a selfie drone from Snapchat. Story 1, a growing number of startups are emerging to challenge the status quo of social media. Deepa Sitharaman of the Wall Street Journal notes, former executives from WhatsApp, for example, want to help fix social media, quote unquote. Neeraj Arora, a WhatsApp executive, blames the fixation on ad dollars, competition, and rapid growth rather than improving core products. He says that social media didn't build with users in mind. Mr. Agora, who owns a 2-year-old startup called Hallo app, Hallo app, Hallo app, he says they plan to charge users $1 to $2 a month, will cap groups at 50 people, and are focusing on so-called community messaging. Posts also disappear after 30 days. But Jasmine, the idea that anyone can reshape social media is blank.
It's not impossible.
Oh.
I mean, could you have imagined 3 years ago that a new, relatively niche app that was focused on lip syncing and dancing like TikTok could rise up and threaten the social media world order?
I was trying to tell people about this a long time ago. No, I'm just kidding. I had no idea.
So you knew.
I knew what's going on. Yeah, good point.
And what I would also add is that, I mean, we have never really seen a successful subscription-based social media app, but it also doesn't mean that it won't happen. I mean, the reality is that the way that we use social media and digital media overall is changing. So it's possible.
Yes. And successful doesn't have to mean that half the planet uses the app.
Absolutely.
Facebook set that standard, which now is kind of almost despicably unrealistic. I thought it was an interesting point, though. Former Facebook product manager Rob Ennals was quoted in this piece saying he thinks scale is the number one problem. No one has worked out the right way to design scale. That was an interesting thought. Story 2. Snap has taken another stab at hardware with a selfie drone called Pixie, writes Alex Heath of The Verge. 5 years ago, Snap released its Spectacles. Now they've created a yellow, oversized puck about the size of your hand that is available in the US and France for $230. The flying camera launches from your hand and captures video and pictures of you. It has 4 main flight patterns: hover, reveal, follow, and orbit. The Pixie weighs 100 grams with a swappable battery. A full charge will get you 5 to 8 flights. Its 12 megapixel sensor shoots up to 100 videos and 1,000 photos stored locally on a 16 gigabit drive. Jasmine, your biggest takeaway from this new flying camera release is blank.
Honestly, I don't have much to say about this, Marcus. I mean, I'd really like to try it.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what happens. You know, Snapchat has had other devices before with the Spectacles, and I know they're working on a new version of them, but I mean, uptake has not been very high. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this one.
Yeah. It's funny because they are a camera company. They're kind of forcing that narrative down people's throats and saying, hey, we're a camera, like you're a social media platform. But they are listed as a camera company. So maybe this makes sense. I was trying to think of when you would use this. They were noting in the article from The Verge from Alex Heath saying parties, maybe hikes. Outside of that, I can't see a real reason.
Yeah, I don't think I'm their target customer, though, to be honest.
Well, yeah, a lot of people might not be. Let's see if they can figure it out. That's all we've got time for this episode. Jasmine, thank you so much for hanging out.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Victoria. She edits the show and also tells ghost stories, terrifying ones. We'll see you tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, an e-marketer podcast made possible by mParticle.